Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Game 6 of the regular season for the San Jose Sharks as they took on the Colorado Avalanche and lost by a score of 4-1. The good news is that the Sharks were not nearly as bad as the awful performance a couple of nights ago against the Winnipeg Jets, in which they lost 8-3. The bad news, however, is that anyway, the Sharks still end up on the losing side of this game, extending their season-opening losing streak to 6 games, now more than halfway to the mark that they set last year when they opened it with 11 straight losses. Now, this one started off not so great for San Jose. It seemed as though it might go the same way as the game a couple of nights ago against Winnipeg, where the Sharks were just kind of stunned and shocked by the amount of skill and speed Colorado was able to bring to this game, primarily from the likes of McKinnon and Rantanen and Makar at even strength, but especially on the power play, which is why the Sharks end up giving up the first 2 goals of this game, both from Ross Colton, however, both pretty much set up by that elite talent that Colorado has. However, late in the first, the Sharks do get a power play of their own, and it is William Eklund who is able to cut the lead in half, and that seemed to give the Sharks a little bit of momentum going into the second period. In the second, they actually limited heavily the amount of chances that Colorado were able to get. Occasionally, they could have some breakout chance, but in terms of actually getting good ozone time, the Sharks really didn't give them a lot to work with. On top of that, they got the Avalanche to take a few penalties of their own, giving the Sharks some power play time to work with, including a 5-on-3 chance. However, the Sharks' power play sort of let them down in that middle frame. You might say, well, at least they did manage to score with that goal from Eklund, and that is true, but there just wasn't a lot of good chances. It's one thing to not score on your power play, but when your power play doesn't actually do anything over its full 2 minutes, not only is it, a missed opportunity, but it is also something that saps your momentum, because your players, they start to get more frustrated, they start to get very disappointed in themselves not being able to actually get good chances, and it's not a recipe for success. So to watch the Sharks come out on yet another 5-on-3 chance, it's not their first time this season, and still not even get close to scoring a goal was definitely rather disappointing. And so the second period remained scoreless. In the third, the Sharks yet again had the majority of the control at even strength, and yet it would be the Colorado Avalanche scoring the only goal on a manned net in that final frame, one from Kiviranta off of just poor defense in their own zone from San Jose. That made it 3-1, and with how much the Sharks have struggled thus far for the majority of the season offensively, a 2-goal deficit was too much to overcome, and eventually it is a Cale Makar empty netter that helps put this game away, 4-1 in the Avalanche advantage. So like I said, the Sharks now 6 straight losses to open this season. A season that was hopeful to be a bit more positive than last year seems to be going in a similar direction, at least in terms of actual results on paper. When it comes to the roster here, we did have a couple of players stepping back in. That could be a big explanation for why the Sharks did look a good bit better than they did those couple of nights ago against Winnipeg. William Eklund returns, and so does Will Smith. However, the first line remains the same nonetheless, as Granlund and Toffoli remain on that top line with Fabian Zetterlund. So perhaps this could be because something like I mentioned in the previous one, where the Sharks attempting to spread around the offense a little bit. There is no question in my eyes that William Eklund is a better player than Zetterlund and would theoretically deserve that top line spot. However, if you want to give your second line a bit more of an offensive flair, having Eklund there does make some sense. And I will say, when it comes to this top line, and in particular Fabian Zetterlund, I thought it was his best game of the year by a pretty decent margin. Zetterlund, I have been, somewhat disappointed in at times thus far this year. Yes, he's managed to score a few goals, but in terms of actually playing at even strength, he really hasn't been a positive for San Jose. That did change here tonight. Not as though he was great, but I thought he was a good bit better. Actually was getting shots on net, which was a big criticism for him. He also missed a few, which was disappointing, but at least he got a couple on net. And he came even rather close to scoring in that first period with a really nice chance. He had a great pass also to Tyler Toffoli very early on in this game, and so Zetterlund, some improvements shown for sure. When it comes to Mikael Granlund, good news, better than against the Winnipeg Jets. Bad news, not quite returning to that level that he had been at in the earlier parts of this season against Anaheim and against Dallas. He made some mistakes here tonight, some good plays. I would say an above average game from Mikael Granlund, but not the best. And then when it comes to Tyler Toffoli, I thought he started this game off rather well. I thought he was one of the Sharks' better forwards in that opening period, in that first period. But then as the game wore on, he slowed down a little bit and wasn't nearly as apparent in that final period, for instance. But I would say probably also kind of like with Mikael Granlund, an above average performance, and this first line was decent. The major problem for San Jose throughout this game, even though they actually got the even strength majority of the possession and zone time, is that it was all kept to the perimeter. The Sharks never could actually get that penetration to the middle, where that's where the actual grade A chances do end up coming from. The Colorado Avalanche this season have a record of, I believe, 1-4. They managed to win their first game of the season just a couple of days ago against the Anaheim Ducks, and it is not because that this is a terrible team on paper. It is quite the opposite. They are very, very good, a perennial Stanley Cup contender, but the major reason has been that their goaltending has been absolutely awful, the worst in the league by a significant margin. And so the Sharks had a chance to take advantage of that for this game if they could actually create any sort of good chances on net, and it felt as though they were so few and far between. You could probably count the high danger chances for the Sharks in this entire game on one hand, and I'm not even sure that you would bring up all 5 fingers at that point. When it comes to the Sharks' second line, we have Wenberg and Goodrow, and it is Eklund who joins these two players. Last game it was Gushchin, and as much as I am a fan of Gushchin, obviously Eklund is going to be an upgrade in this situation. And I would go so far as to say not only was Eklund an upgrade, he was probably the Sharks' best player here tonight. I will say this about William Eklund: it feels as though he is becoming kind of like the heart and soul of this San Jose Sharks team. In the past, I have used that to describe Mario Ferraro, but it feels as though that has now shifted to William Eklund, who just wears his heart on his sleeve. He's always giving it his 110%. You could truly tell the frustration in a way with William Eklund of how this season has gone and how last year went in his rookie year. He wants to win games. He's willing to play in games of which he's not 100% to try and help out, and he's still very, very effective on the ice. And here, returning from that brief injury where he did end up missing that game from Winnipeg, I thought he was really, really, really good. Clearly the best player on this second line, and it just kind of ended up being the case where he didn't really have a lot of offensive help, and such it didn't generate a ton of great chances. It felt as though it was William Eklund against the world throughout much of this game, but I'm still very, very impressed with how he has done. Clearly his best game of the season, and he has just been getting better and better as this one has gone on. When it comes to his centerman, I would say Alex Wenberg was not terrible. I don't think Wenberg had an awful game, and perhaps you could even argue it was his best game of the season, but like I said in that Winnipeg Jets review, it's a situation where Wenberg has never really blown me out of the water in terms of actually playing well on the ice, and so even a slight improvement, even calling him his best game of the season, is still not quite where I was hoping Wenberg would be. However, what I can say is that there is the beginning, there's a small seed planted of potential chemistry between Eklund and Wenberg. There were a couple of good moments where they did click here tonight, more so because of Eklund, but I don't think Wenberg was awful. And so especially with Celebrini remaining out, perhaps for the next week, perhaps for the next couple of weeks, at least the foreseeable future, this Eklund-Wenberg duo, we'll see if they remain together and if that chemistry will be given a chance to blossom, or if Eklund will end up getting moved back to the first line. We don't know yet. However, the major reason why this second line did not really end up generating many chances was honestly Barclay Goodrow. Sure, you can play in the offensive zone because William Eklund will keep possession for like 90% of the time, even fighting up against players like Makar and McKinnon in the zone, but when it comes to getting those chances, you do have to work off of your teammates, and Goodrow was just not a positive force in the offensive zone here. I thought he was okay in this second line role last game for San Jose, but once that level of play rose and once the Sharks actually came to play in this one, Goodrow just simply could not keep up. The play would always die on his stick in the offensive zone, and things just wouldn't actually go well because Goodrow was on the ice. At the very least, there weren't the major egregious mistakes that he has been making in the past, so he got back that reliability title. However, Goodrow, it's quite clear his spot is further down in the lineup, and somebody else should be taking up this second line mantle because this is not it for Wersofsky. When it comes to the third line, we have Cunnin with Will Smith and Danil Gushchin. So when I heard that this line was getting put together, I was cautiously optimistic about it. I was excited because seeing Smith and Gushchin, there was hype there. There was the potential that could end up being a dynamic duo for the San Jose Sharks moving forward. But it didn't actually end up being the case. And we'll start off with Will Smith. So as we know, his first 3 games of the season, not very good. Definitely one of the lowest impact players on the San Jose Sharks over those 3 games. But then against Chicago, he comes out, he plays 19 minutes of time on ice. He's a good bit better, like a 6-on-10 type of performance, a big step forward. And we were hopeful that we could see that continued trend upward. But then he's not played in the lineup on Friday against Winnipeg. And this was said to be, a scheduled rest day for Will Smith. But it almost seems that it took the wind out of his sails, because stepping into this one, Smith seemed to revert back to his performances in the first 3 games of the season. Sure, he had that one really, really nice play where he completely dekes out, I believe it was Sam Girard for Colorado, to feed a great chance in front for Luke Cunnin and then for Danil Gushchin. That was very nice to see. But besides that, it felt as though Smith was flubbing pucks constantly. He didn't really have very good puck management skills at all. He was fanning, he was overskating. There just wasn't a lot of finesse nor poise in Will Smith's game here tonight. And what I truly want to see from Smith moving forward is more fire and more drive in his game. I want to see a little bit more confidence. Obviously, it's tough. You've been struggling considerably. You haven't been putting up goals. You haven't been putting up points. And in previous places that you have played in your career, in the NCAA and in the US NDP, you have been the guy. You have been you could close your eyes, one hand tied behind your back, and you'd still end up with an assist on some sort of goal from Gabe Perreault and Ryan Leonard. And now in the NHL, it's an entirely different ball game, and it feels as though nothing is going right. I understand why the confidence might be low, but I want to see a little bit more. I want to see some William Eklund-esque plays from Will Smith, because right now it feels as though almost he's just kind of going through the motions, which is somewhat disappointing to see. When it comes to his 2 line mates, we do have Danil Gushchin. And look, I am a big fan of Gushchin. I'm excited that he got yet another chance in the lineup. He was certainly deserving of it, as I felt as though he was perhaps the Sharks' best forward in the previous game against Winnipeg. And I am hopeful that he will also get the next game on Tuesday against the Anaheim Ducks. But with that being said, we do have to call a spade, and Danil Gushchin was not very effective here tonight for the Sharks at all. The major benefit that Gushchin has been giving San Jose when he has been in the lineup the 2 previous games is that he has been someone who is very good at playing in the offensive zone. He's able to keep pucks in the offensive zone and keep it in the Sharks' possession. Not the case here tonight. He wasn't necessarily generating chances in those moments, but he was actually doing that. And as they say, the best defense is a good offense. But it wasn't really the case here tonight. Was that entirely on Gushchin? Not necessarily. Like I said, Smith struggled, and you'll hear in a little bit that Luke Cunnin certainly was no help either. But at the same time, Gushchin had previously individually been quite good. It didn't feel quite at that level. The good news I will say about Danil Gushchin is that there were no egregious mistakes here tonight. So this was not like a Klim Kostin-esque game in which he's like making 2 to 3 awful turnovers in his own zone or in the offensive zone that completely end plays. That's at the very least the case, which is why I say he should be in the lineup for next game, because he's still a much better option than what Klim Kostin could ever offer. But considering the bar for Gushchin seems to be exceptionally high, higher than literally any other player on this team, it seems, for Wersofsky, seeing him play just like an average 5-on-10 type of performance, it could perhaps get him benched. I'd be disappointed to see it, but I also wouldn't be that surprised. And then when it comes to Luke Cunnin, like I said, pretty much dead weight on this line. He had the great chance that was entirely set up by Will Smith, but besides that, he didn't do absolutely anything. And so we could argue between these 3 players, kind of like a chicken or the egg type of scenario, who was truly the major problem on this line that really made it so that it didn't click. But realistically, it feels as though all 3 of these players just didn't really have the best of nights, and that's why this third line, while not the worst line for the Sharks, I'll get to that in a bit, was one that didn't actually generate much offensive pressure for them. And then we get to the 4th line, which does take the title of worst line of the night for San Jose. And the major reason for that is that if we take a look at the 2 even-strength goals that Colorado scored, the 4th line was on the ice for both of them. And considering the 4th line had the lowest ice time, more or less, amongst all lines, That's saying something. The second Colton goal, it is Ty Dellandrea. That is his man. Colton activates the Jets. Dellandrea does not, which allows him to get that breakaway and score that goal. And then I won't fully blame the fourth line for the Kiviranta goal, because I think that there were major issues with the Sharks' defensive pairing on this shift. Ferraro and Ruda, who I will also get to a little bit later. But still, Nico Sturm doesn't make the correct read here, doesn't realize he has to stand further back in his own zone, leaves Kiviranta all alone to score that one. And so the fourth line definitely struggling a little bit. Carl Grundstrom barely really played all that much in this game, was pretty much invisible when he was on the ice anyway. Ty Dellandrea, we were looking for a bounce-back game after a rough one against Winnipeg. Didn't actually end up happening. And then Nico Sturm, you know, I commend Nico Sturm, because one thing that was very interesting about this fourth line is that they actually got the first shift of every single period, and I imagine the reason for that is that Nico Sturm is the Sharks' best face-off guy this season. It was also the case last season, and so by having them on the ice for that first draw, you have a very good chance at starting the period with possession. That seemed to be the direction that the Sharks were going, so I do commend Sturm for his ability to do that. But you also want to see some defensive responsibility. You also want to see at least a little bit of offensive flair. Neither of those, I think, were Sturm's forte here tonight. And so it was definitely a struggle for this entire fourth line. On the defensive side of things, we have the top pairing of Ceci and Walman. I've talked about Walman over these first 5 games of the year. He has been by far, not even close, the San Jose Sharks' best defenseman. Here tonight, you could make the argument that he still was, but I do think he was at least a little bit worse than he has been in the past. One thing that I have been noticed, and is perhaps like due to frustration shown by Jake Walman, but from an offensive perspective, it feels as though he's just been wiring pucks towards the net. And you might be thinking, well, why is that like a bad thing? But you sometimes want to be able to keep possession in the offensive zone. Sometimes a shot is a good choice, but sometimes just making the pass off, trying to tire out the Avalanche defenders is the smart move, and it felt as though Walman more often than not this game was taking these shots that would just end play for San Jose, that you're just kind of hoping for a lucky bounce off of it. I wouldn't be surprised if he was up at like 10 plus shot attempts here tonight, it felt like at times, because of just how much he was really wiring towards the net. And so it's not necessarily like a really bad, terrible thing. Oh, Walman, you need to stop doing this. You need to eliminate this from your game. But it's something to perhaps look to get a little bit more finesse into. But generally, I thought Walman was okay. Not great, not his best game tonight, but still decent. When it comes to his defensive partner, Ceci, I thought this was an improvement for Ceci. His game against Winnipeg and Chicago was really, really bad. It's not quite returning to the level, kind of like with Mikael Granlund. It's not quite returning to the level as it was in the early parts of this season, but we're starting to at least get a bit of a bounce back. When it comes to the third defensive pairing, I'm actually going to skip over the second for now. We have Thrun and Thompson, so we did have a substitution here finally. Matt Benning steps out of the lineup, and we are very thankful for that. Jack Thompson steps in, and you know, at a baseline, I was just hoping that Thompson wouldn't be a liability on the ice, and that would already make him like 3 times better than Matt Benning. But here tonight, he was like 10 times better than Matt Benning. Not only was Thompson not a liability, I actually thought he was rather solid defensively, but on top of that, I also liked Thompson's offensive game. It was certainly a level above what we've seen from Benning, which is very, very little. Thompson even got time on the Sharks' second power play unit. The second power play unit didn't really amount to anything, but the fact that he's even there was a decent sign. He had a couple of really strong offensive zone shifts, and so I am a much larger fan of this third pairing for San Jose compared to what we had seen in the first 5 games, not only because Thompson is an improvement over Benning, but it also seemed to have a really nice effect on Henry Thrun, who had his best game of the season by a significant margin here tonight as well. I thought Thrun was much more responsible defensively. I don't know if this is because of Benning and him having more confidence playing with someone like Thompson instead, or what, if it was just a coincidence, but Thrun a lot better here tonight, and so I am hopeful that this can be the third pairing that remains the case, at least for the foreseeable future, until like Vlasic or Mukhamadullin do return, where then another lineup shakeup would happen. But I would say that lineup shakeup shouldn't happen on the third pairing, but instead the second pairing, because that's where we have Ferraro and Ruda, who yet again, for perhaps the 6th game this season of a 6-game season, were really, really, really bad. It's just, there isn't really any positives to find out of these two players. I've talked about this already in the past. They're both these defensive guys who have very little puck moving ability, so they don't even complement each other well. I don't actually know why they are paired on this same pairing. It feels as though 95% of the time when they get the puck in the defensive zone, their simple play is to just chip it off the glass, which is sometimes fine if you have to, but there are moments where you see, okay, you could work it to this center and he'll actually carry the puck off, but instead of just making a simple pass out where they can keep possession carrying it through the neutral zone, they chip it out, the other team picks it up, they re-enter the zone, and then that just further extends the length of time that Ferraro and Ruda have to stay on the ice, which further extends the time of that shift, which makes it so they get tired, and that opens up great chances for other teams to get a goal or at least get a chance on net, because Ferraro and Ruda get caught on the ice for a minute plus. It's just not a good recipe. I do not know why these two players remain together. I don't think either of them, I don't think like one is being held back by the other. I think both have just been struggling immensely, and there really isn't, like I said, any sort of positives to find for the two of them. Ruda, I was honestly surprised he didn't get benched after his incredibly selfish penalties in each of the previous two games, but I guess since the Sharks only had one fill-in, Thompson, and they decided to use it on Benning, that's why he ends up getting this lineup spot. But again, he takes another terrible penalty here tonight, so I mean, it's only a matter of time, I feel as though, in Ruda's spot on this Sharks lineup, because he's certainly giving zero reasons to stay in. And then when it comes to the Sharks goaltender, Vitek Vanacek, I thought he had a good game. Didn't really have much of a chance on any of these Avalanche goals. The first one from Colton was a relatively easy tap-in. The second one was on a breakaway. You could argue he could have made the saves, but I'm not going to really put that much blame on him when the defense in front failed as they did. Kiviranta, a very nice move by Kiviranta, and also, of course, the Sharks defense again failing in front of him. Vanacek even ended up making a couple of really nice saves in the first period on another Avalanche power play. He had a great one also, I believe, on Ross Colton, by the way. So that kept the Sharks alive, and so it really wasn't his fault that San Jose ended up losing their sixth in a row. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Tuesday. We'll be taking on the Anaheim Ducks again. They faced the Ducks 3 times in the preseason, 1 time in the rookie faceoff, and now it's going to be in just their 7th game, a 2nd time in this regular season. So I wonder if these players are getting sick of seeing each other. But the Sharks, they lost that first matchup against the Ducks 2-0. They'll be looking for a bit of a better result from this one. Hopefully they can finally break out of this losing streak, because I'm certainly getting tired of watching loss after loss after loss after loss after loss after loss. Class dismissed.